from Tel Aviv. The IDF says it struck multiple targets inside Lebanon today. This is Israel's defence minister heads back from Washington after crunch talks aimed at heading off an all-out war with Hezbollah. Well, the town of Metula in the north of Israel has come under heavy fire today. Israel earlier today. Well, there are growing voices inside Lebanon warning that Hezbollah is dragging the country towards a very dangerous situation. Take a listen to this Lebanese journalist, Dima Sadek.
Hassan Nasrallah has issued a serious military threat against an EU member state, Cyprus. Are you aware of what you're doing? Are you capable of engaging in a conflict with the European Union? Hezbollah and Iran combined couldn't even save Bashar al-Assad. You're threatening NATO, the European Union, the United States and Israel. You're threatening 80% of the world's military power. Does anyone really think that the Iran axis, which lacks the capabilities to locate its own missing president, can take on NATO, the US, Israel and the EU all together?
No, absolutely not. And guess what the response is? You are Zionist agents, you are Israeli agents, you work with the CIA. You know, the whole game that Hezbollah used to threaten anybody against them. And people in Lebanon understand that Hezbollah threats are real. We saw what happened to former Prime Minister, to the late Prime Minister Hariri, to so many members of parliament and even officers in the army. Hezbollah is controlling Lebanon with terror. That's why it's very difficult to just rely on statements made by the Lebanese politicians or leaders. The international community and the US and the Lebanese diaspora should be leading the pressure on Hezbollah.
And we saw the damage to Beirut following that explosion at the port a few years ago. We've just had this report about weapons being stored at Beirut International Airport. That must have been a source of real concern for a lot of people inside Lebanon. Other proxies, namely fighters in Iraq, to help Hezbollah in its attacks on Israel. And is this a credible threat? How many fighters are we talking about? How closely do those groups work together as it is?
Well, first of all, let's do a quick comparison. Hamas, with their strength and how long they dragged the war, are completely isolated. And now when Israel took the border between Egypt and Gaza, they are surrounded. Hezbollah is not surrounded. Hezbollah is across all of Lebanon. And of course, it's stretched into Syria, where, by the way, it is conducting a war against the Sunni there, and all the way to the borders of Iraq. So yes, Tehran has this amazing ability to move militias from Iran itself, from Iraq to the border with Jordan first. You know, Jordan is now targeted by the Iran militias, and all the way to Syria. So if you ask me about numbers, the numbers that we have seen, obviously, this is not intelligence reporting, but are about 100. Well, he receives the instructions from the Grand Ayatollah and the Pasdaran in Iran. After all, they are not just a branch, they are an extension of it. So the general plan of the regime, as far as we understand it, is ceasefire or calming the situation, but keeping Hamas even under the rubble, even in underground, because it can grow again from there. And the price would be that Hezbollah would tell, international community, I am ready for a ceasefire, but don't touch the remnants of Hamas. They are very smart in Tehran. They're trying to end the war with Israel getting no real results, neither in Gaza or in southern Lebanon. But Hezbollah knows very well, and I'm going to add one point that you have mentioned, Laura, before that. If the Lebanese rise against Hezbollah, that would change the whole equation. The UN Agency for Food Security says it was wrong
to predict that there would be a full-blown famine in Gaza by July. The IPC says that food supplies into the Strip have increased, not decreased, as it predicted. Israel says the main risk of famine comes from Hamas, which continues to attack the crossings that are used to facilitate aid. Jody Notelowitz has this report.
As the Israel-Gaza conflict rages on, the subject of humanitarian aid has become increasingly problematic. On Tuesday, Jonathan Miller, Israel's deputy ambassador to the United Nations, revealed that almost all United Nations requests for the coordination of humanitarian convoys have been approved, but that the problem lies with the collection and distribution process by the UN.
Since the beginning of the war, more than 36,000 aid trucks have been brought into Gaza. This is over 682,000 tons of humanitarian aid, which has included food, water, shelter equipment, medical supplies, fuel, gas, and more.
But as the UN pressures Israel for better coordination with aid groups, Hamas continues to take advantage of these initiatives and jeopardize the lives of civilians in spite of the IDF's endeavors to expand humanitarian assistance.
Including such ideas as trying to make sure that UN workers have personal protective equipment.
At this stage, the UN spokesman says the situation has to be monitored day by day. But the total lawlessness on the ground, as described UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres, will only further the risk of famine in the region.
Well, let's get more on that report from the UN-linked IPC Food Security Agency now. Our Mike Wagenheim is our senior US correspondent. He joins us now from New York. So, Mike, we were told, weren't we, that children were dying of starvation in Gaza. Was that claim that was picked up and amplified, of course, by the world's media wrong, incorrect? And if so, why?
Completely incorrect. And any third grader with a calculator could have seen that months ago. And the reason it was incorrect is because, as a famine review committee of the IPC pointed out a couple of weeks ago, the IPC was not taking into account major food deliveries that were going into Gaza from the commercial sector, from the private sector, even from the UN's own World Food Program.
Well, meanwhile, the trouble-stricken US aid pier, which has been twice dismantled because of rough seas, is back up and running. And for the first time, journalists have been invited to see it in action. Our Emma Siegel has this report.
Floating in the Mediterranean Sea, shouting distance from Gaza's war-torn coastline, the $230 million US-made Gaza pier is up and running again after its fourth pause in operations. The U.S. military invited reporters for a tour of the pier on Tuesday.
Iranians head to the polls on Friday in a tightly controlled election to replace the late President Raisi, who was killed in a helicopter crash last month. Ahead of the vote, 6 presidential candidates took part in a live TV debate. Our Middle East correspondent Ariel Osseran has the details.
Iran's presidential race is in its final stretch as the 6 candidates make their last bid.
Well, meanwhile, Iran has issued a fresh call for US troops to leave Syria. The Iranian representative to the United Nations said the Syrian people were suffering under foreign occupation, claiming that Western countries were trying to impose their will on the Syrian people. Iran and Russia both intervened in the war in Syria in 2015 to prop up the dictator Bashar al-Assad, and Iranian proxy militias control territory inside Syria. The United States has around 900 troops in Homs province to support Kurdish forces who are fighting the Islamic State group. Well, to talk more about that, we're joined by Joel Rayburn.